It's the month of October, and you know what that means. It means that we start to see the beautiful changing leaf colors happening outside. It means that we get to enjoy a little bit of sweater weather, which is the time of the year that I absolutely live for. It's also the time of the year where we have those crisp, cool mornings and evenings, and we get to enjoy warm drinks all day long. But it's also spooky season, which is one of my favorites. So in this video, I want to share with you what are some very simple activities that you can be incorporating into your upper elementary classroom as a literacy teacher without going full-blown Halloween. Now, over the course of my years of teaching, I've gone through every type of experience possible when it came to celebrations inside of the classroom. Back when I started teaching kindergarten, we had full-blown character days and we had Halloween parties, and it was always so much fun. But as we started getting into upper elementary, a lot of the rules had started to shift and change. And maybe you're also starting to experience some of those changes as well, where we're not really allowed to go full-blown Halloween, but more so focusing on just a hint of the spooky season or focusing it more on harvest and fall. And so the time that I've had in the classroom, I've really changed and altered the way that I've celebrated or incorporated some of these spooky elements inside of my classroom that also lends itself to encouraging conversation, learning, exploration, and just kids having really good time and enjoying this time of the year together. And so I wanted to share what some of those items may look like for you as an upper elementary literacy teacher. Now, these are going to be activities that can fit for 3rd through 6th grade. So depending on your grade level, you might want to try a combination of these. You might only want to do one of them, and it always depends. For me, typically, I had about 2 or 3 different activities that I would incorporate throughout the month in order for my students to kind of have fun and enjoy the spooky season itself. Now, I always saved one of these for the day of Halloween, and it was mainly because the kids were not in the mood to have their normal routines and to try and focus on all the things that they were typically doing inside of our literacy classroom. And so I wanted to add a little bit of change and some nuance and some excitement for them without having to go full-blown Halloween in order to respect some of the students who maybe didn't celebrate Halloween, but then also add in some of those spooky elements that I really, really enjoyed. So these activities are all literacy activities. There's going to be some form of learning that's occurring, and you're going to find that your students will absolutely love them. If you're somebody who is within the Bridging Literacy community, all of these items are available inside of the community. So you can head over into the monthly resources folder and be able to download and access all of them. Now, if you're not in the community, we would love to be able to have you. This is a 3rd through 6th grade literacy community for teachers who want to be able to have resources, but also grow in their understanding and their application and craft of literacy instruction. So I'm going to leave some links for you to go and check it out. We do accept purchase orders. So talk with your administration if there is some way for you to be able to have that purchased through the school, and we're happy to be able to work with you. So the activities that I have for you are going to vary. I mean, some of them are really kind of low key. Some of them are going to be fairly quick. There are others that are going to take a little bit longer. But I wanted to give you some ideas of some variations that are out there that I've seen and how I've kind of shifted it and changed it just ever so slightly to work for my style of teaching. You can absolutely do the exact same thing for you and your students. So I'm going to jump into one of the very first activities. Now, if you've been watching me for a little bit, then you know that I love podcasts. I mean, it would make sense because I have a podcast called Teaching to the Top. But that's not a spooky podcast and not one that I would actually share with my students. But I have incorporated podcasts over the years with my students in a variety of different ways. And one of the things that I did with my 6th grade group of students is we listened to a podcast. And it's a pretty famous podcast as far as it's very well known for incorporating it into classrooms to kind of bring in the spookiness. So there's lots of resources that are out there. I'm going to show you the one that I created for my students. So the podcast itself is Criminal. That's the name of it. And it's called A Bump in the Night. So you can Google it. It's Criminal Bump in the Night. And on that podcast, it's basically it seems like it would be really spooky. It is spooky, but it's the conversation, and it is the talking about like, oh my gosh, is she crazy? Is it real? Is it true? Is it not? That the kids just really get into it. And so in that podcast, you meet somebody called Amber, and Amber talks about her experience of moving into an apartment and hearing things in the night, but then things would get moved. There would be food that would be eaten or drinks that were taken. And then she sees somebody that's in her apartment one night and she kind of runs off. Very, very good. I highly recommend that you go and read it. So we listened to that podcast. And sometimes I would have my students listen to it just all the way through. And then the next time I would have them listen to it, and then we would stop it and we would pause and we would have conversations. And I would ask them very specific questions that I wanted them thinking about as we were going through it the second time, because it's not very long. And then afterwards, I had them get to work. So I gave them a resource that looks like this. And on the resource itself, there were some questions that I wanted them to think about. So who is the main character? What is the setting of that story? How does Amber keep her apartment? So asking more about her character and how does she like maintain the atmosphere of her apartment, because she's very specific in the podcast. So she says, another one is, does Amber live with anything or anyone? Explain. List 3 events that occurred to make Amber feel like someone was there, because she kind of goes through the sequence of events. And then what conclusion did Amber come to? And then after that, we're going to put, do you agree or disagree with Amber's conclusion? Explain why and what you believe really happened. So they have to provide evidence from the podcast in order to support their thinking. You see where I'm going with this? So it is a very simple activity, but one that students really enjoyed. And so I would put them into groups after they were done, and then I would have them be able to just like share their thoughts and their opinions and argue their reasonings. And the kids really enjoyed it. So it just kind of added a little element to it. And I also turned out the lights. You know, I put on kind of some little flickering lights kind of to add to the ambiance itself. And the kids really enjoyed it. And it worked out great because I had a group of kids. There were a number of them who did not celebrate Halloween. And so I wanted to respect them. And it was perfect. Like the kids really, really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend that one. The second activity that I have for you goes along with the book called The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. Now, I've had this book for years. I actually have a number of Chris Van Allsburg, I believe it's how it's pronounced. I have a number of his books that I have just collected and gathered over the years. But what I love about this is just how cool the images are. Now, there's not a lot of text when you look at this book overall. And it has some captions for each of them. But what would be really cool is if you took this text and you took some pictures, and then from those pictures, you could have students be able to discuss them. So you could print out like 5 or 6 images that you would either post around the room, or maybe you would give them to small groups. And then afterwards, students would select one image, just one image, no more than that. And they would have to write what we would call a 10-word summary. Now, you could do a 10-word summary, you could do a $10 summary, like there's a $1 summary. There's so many variations that are out there that you can really incorporate. The challenge is getting kids to have a very specific number or amount that you want them to consolidate their thinking. So they could work with partners after they select one of the images from the book, and then they would write their summaries. Afterwards, you could have students present their summaries to the group, and then everybody has to be able to guess which of the 5 or 6 images that you've printed that summary belongs to. So it's a really cool way to get them like hearing and listening and really thinking very specifically about the image itself and creating a summary for that. And I promise the kids would absolutely love this activity. The next activity that I have is going to be one that incorporates a little campfire stories. As a kid, I remember loving scary stories. They were some of my absolute favorite books. And I have very vivid memories of when it would be raining in Houston, and I would be getting onto the bus, and the windows would be so foggy, and you would have to kind of wipe the windows off, and it would be really, really dark when the buses would come and pick us up. And I would read scary stories, and we would all take turns reading the short stories to each other in the back of the bus. Like, that is the crew that I was with, and it was the absolute best. So this is going to be Campfire Stories. And with Campfire Stories, it is thinking about ways for students to write their own story and share it with each other. So there are 2 specific stories that we could have them thinking about. Nostalgic for me type of stories. The Ghost with a Bloody Finger is one of them. Does anybody remember that? Right? Rap. Now, you're probably saying, Bridget, why in the world did you pick these 2 stories? Because these 2 stories build the tension, the anticipation, the I'm on the edge of my seat type of vibes. But then at the very end, it has kind of a lighthearted, humorous type feel to it. So it's scary, but not really that scary, because at the end of it, it just ends up being funny. And so getting your kids to think about how they can incorporate some of those elements and looking at these mentor texts is just really cool. So you would provide students opportunities to go through. They would analyze the 2 texts with you. You would read through them. You would have them kind of pinpoint what are some of the craft that the authors bring into the stories themselves. And then afterwards, you would have them plan out their own campfire story. So they would have the setting, the character, the scary part, the funny part, which is at the end, and of course the narrator voice, because the narrator voice plays a really important role in how you build that. I can't even think of the word. Why can't I think of the word? Build that kind of on the edge feelings with your students. I can't think of the word with it. So we're just going to move right on through. So with this one, you can see that it's rap, 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 rap. And it just builds this sound, and it's getting louder and it's getting raspier. And it's really what you want to incorporate into the reading of the text, because it just makes it builds so much more tension for the reader itself. So adding in all of those elements. And then once they have planned out their little short stories, they have paper that they could write their short stories on. So very simple paper. I have 2 different formats that go along with it, but then they would write their scary stories. And then I also have a template for building a campfire. Now, I did have little wood pieces. However, my dog decided to eat those wood pieces, so I don't have them anymore. But I have a little campfire that you could build a campfire for each of your groups. So I would place students in about groups of 4, 3 or 4. They would each have their own campfires. You can even purchase some of those little flickering lights that kind of mimic the campfires, and then place it around it. And then that way every group has a campfire, their scary stories, and then give them 1 flashlight. Because what you will end up doing is that you can turn off the lights, you can have every group kind of running independently, and then each group will use their flashlight to read their scary stories. And so as kids are finishing up, they will pass the flashlight on to the next person, and then they will be able to read it. Now, what's cool about this activity and the way that it's kind of structured is that you could even group students with different groups. So you could almost create multiple rotations, so that if you wanted to incorporate it over the course of like 3 days of them sharing their stories with one another, you could just place students into a mixture of groups. That way they have the opportunity to hear more stories rather than only hearing 2 other stories with their peers. But it's organized in a sense that students are all engaged. They're not sitting there just listening to one student at a time. And it just, again, it's the ambiance. Like, it just adds a really cool feel to the whole thing. The last activity idea that I have for you is one that I'm really, really excited about because I've taken this idea of the character analysis, and I've seen these character analysis posters online, and I decided to put my own hand at creating one myself, which I mean, it's not easy. I'm just going to say that. So it's taking a very classic story of the Legends of Sleepy Hollow, and it's making it really engaging for upper elementary kiddos. And so students would have the opportunity to read that short story. Now, there's a lot of variations online. I think you can find one on Reading A to Z. I have one that I've used from Scholastic. You can even find free versions online and that are simple enough to be able to read for 5th and 6th grade. I don't know if I would technically do this in a 3rd or 4th grade classroom. This is more for or 5th and 6th grade. And so students would read the text, and then from there, they could select one of the characters. So you had Ichabod Crane. You have Katrina, and then you have the other gentleman, which now I can't remember his name. Brom. His name is Brom. So you could then provide every single student with their own character analysis. Y'all have got to have seen these, right? Before, like they're all over the internet. They're pretty like Insta-famous type situation. So I made my own version of what a character analysis would look like for those individual characters. Now, each one has its own format. So here's Katrina, here's Brom, so you can see the 3 different versions, and you would just put them all together. Now, for 5th and 6th grade, it's more focused on a character analysis of it, hence why it says Sleepy Hollow character analysis. We look at external traits, we look at actions, quotes from the text, the conflicts that are happening, thoughts, feelings, likes, dislikes, and then also just a quick character synopsis at the very end of it. So that way they're having to kind of give you a generalized summary of who this character is in the story. Like, what is the role that they play in that text? And then what's really neat is that once students have provided an analysis, you can group them together. That way they then would just share their analysis with other members inside of their classroom. You could also post this up outside and allow others to be able to view it. It's just a really cool, simple activity, but still brings in that spookiness. And yet at the same time, it's still learning that's occurring. You're still hitting standards. You're still keeping them engaged and making sure that it doesn't turn into mass chaos inside of your classroom, which is key here. So that's 4 different activities. Now, of course, there are so many other ones that you could do out there. You can incorporate some very simple elements between breakouts or doing some form of crossword puzzles. Like I have had classes who've loved crossword puzzles. I have classes who loved doing like spooky boggles. So there's so many elements that you can incorporate into the classroom to kind of add that into there, but without making it feel like it's completely, totally Halloween-esque vibes. Especially if you're within a school that doesn't necessarily allow that to happen inside of the classrooms. So hopefully these have sparked some inspiration for you as far as incorporating some of these into your rooms. Let me know which out of the 4 you like the most. Which one would you incorporate into your classrooms the most? Just remember that if you are a Bridging Literacy community member, you have access to all of these resources. So head over to the community and then you can download those from the monthly folder downloads. Okay. If you have any questions about the community, I would love to be able to answer those for you. I'm going to leave some links to some different items so that way you can kind of see what the community is all about and see if you would like to be able to join. There is no contract whatsoever, so you can cancel at any time. But we would love to be able to have you inside of the community to be able to support you as you are continuing to learn and grow inside of literacy instruction. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure that you hit that subscribe button if you enjoy listening to content about literacy instruction and getting some ideas for how you can authentically incorporate very simple activities to help increase and excite your students, but also teach them in a very rigorous and authentic way. We would also love it if you would just like the video so that we can help to get it out there to other teachers. And don't forget to leave comments and hit that notification bell so you can get notified when I upload a brand new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Bye.